The topic before us is spiritual values for the information technology age. When we choose a topic like this, which is related to many aspects, which is somewhat unconventional in a spiritual platform, I have to make two very important points clear. Why this topic is important. First of all, it's based on two fundamental principles. One, civilization and culture do not evolve along with science and technology. Development in science and technology, the sophisticated tools that we develop over the centuries, may not necessarily correspond to a proportionate development or progress in culture and civilization. This is a very important point we have to remember. Frequently in books on sociology and anthropology, we often mistake or misinterpret development of scientific technological devices as part of progression or progress in civilization and culture. To give a simple example, that's what I'm going to present before you. I'm not somebody from information technology culture, rather the opposite of it somewhat. I prefer to keep a long distance away from it, in fact. And you'll gradually understand why. Not because it is itself bad or evil, but because when not properly handled, it can mean a kind of cultural suicide, a civilizational suicide, and a gradual atrophy of many of the inherited human skills, which evolve only in a spiritual tradition. So that's a very important point to remember. It is not atrophy at the physical level, but atrophy at the value level, at the intellectual level, our ability to memorize, to retain our mind, to read something, and to focus on an idea and keep it for a long time in our mind. In Sanskrit, there is a word called mananam. So mananam, literally it means contemplating on something that you read and listen to. This is what mananam means. When we read a book, or when we read a poem, or when we read anything, we get the literal meaning. But the more profound implications of that particular lesson or idea will become obvious only when we close the book, and then when we try to recollect, bring back to our mind what you have read, and think profoundly on the implications of that. Then only the deeper implications of what we read becomes obvious. Now, you don't find somebody watching a screen on the computer and contemplating on what he reads on the computer screen. But you may have seen the pictures, not only of Indian sages, but even if you have seen the pictures of Socrates, Aristotle, you can find they are always in a contemplative nature. Moreover, Indian Prime Minister, who was certainly not a great intellectual, as is very often misunderstood to be, like Dr. Radhakrishnan. But yes, he is supposed to have assumed a posture like this for the portrait, so to look like Aristotle. And just imagine a politician who wrote a book, Glimpses of World History of, and things like that. Not very profound, but he knew a little about many things, but not everything about anything. So he was a contemporary of a great philosopher like Dr. Radhakrishnan. So what I mean to say, even when he studied in Oxford, Cambridge, Eton, Harrow, and things like that, mind you, which I'm going to detail. My point is, people used to be proud to look like Aristotle or Socrates. Now, if you look at the faces of those great thinkers, they are not looking at you, staring at you with bulging eyes. Rather, very often they will place their hand on the cheeks, more of a contemplative mood. That is the posture of mananam. So, Sravanartha Dhyanam, that is called mananam. That's a literal translation. But it means, Srudartha, Sravanartha. What you hear or what you read, you close the book and sit for some time and think deeply over what you have read. That is called mananam. Now, such a process as mananam or deeper contemplation is totally impossible in a culture where IT becomes the master and the human beings become the slaves. So that's why it is called atrophy of many of the human skills can happen in an age where science and technology are not used as tools, but as looked upon as masters. They'll be wonderful if you look upon them as tools or instruments in our hands, not as a stick to use, not a clutch to lean upon. Is a statement from Bernard Shaw. He says, science should be a stick that you wield and not a clutch to lean upon. It should not become a clutch without which we cannot walk. A walking stick you can discard. You can change it. But you cannot discard a clutch unless you want to fall down. So it should not become a master. But that has not happened, and especially it is not happening in an age dominated by not science and technology, but by the culture of science and technology. There's a great difference between science and technology on the one hand and the culture produced by science and technology. It becomes a cultural paradigm, which can be a prelude to a mass human cultural spiritual suicide and a gradual atrophy of many human skills, higher skills. So that's one. In fact, I was trying to combine these two important principles. First, as science and technology move forward, culture and civilization can walk backward, can move backward. Even in Indian tradition, they have drawn a very clear line of demarcation between culture and civilization. I tell you, some time back, I had an opportunity to talk to a highly respectable, very learned, a retired American professor who had made a lot of attempts to study Indian spiritual heritage, Gandhian philosophy, Vedic heritage, and so on. So he was a professor, and he was narrating an incident. Indian students, most of American universities are dependent upon remittances of foreign students for their survival. So he had occasion to address a group of Indian students who were trying to outsmart Americans in being Americans. They would have been very happy to claim to be distant nephews or cousins of George Washington or Lincoln, which they can't do, of course, unfortunately. So he was addressing such a group of students who are doing their best to disown their heritage and to put up an air of being American, more American than perhaps George Washington himself. And one instruction he repeatedly gave them in classroom and also whenever he got an opportunity to talk to them was, he reminded them of the last sentence uttered by Paul Dewson when he left Indian soil, maybe in the 1920s. Paul Dewson was a great German Indologist who went to Benares, studied Sanskrit and Vedas, and historically he's supposed to be the greatest scholar that Western world has ever produced of Sanskrit language, who would actually speak and articulate his ideas in Sanskrit. But he's the only one in the history of the long line of Indologists and Sanskrit scholars. He was the only one who studied sitting at the feet of a great Indian Pandit in Benares. So the last sentence that he spoke when he was given a send-off in Bombay seaport, he was about to return to Europe, was he gave a long description of the glory of India's Vedic heritage. And the last sentence, Indians don't forget this. That's what this American professor who is still living in the Bay Area reminded his Indian students. So what happens is, very often we may mistake science and technology, sophistication and external glamour to be a development in culture and civilization. It is not so. In Sanskrit, there are two words, Samskriti and Parishkriti. Samskriti stands for culture, Parishkriti stands for civilization. Civilization could always mean external refinement, or maybe advancement in science and technology, advancement in communication. So Hitler's Nazi Germany was, in that respect, technologically the most advanced nation in Europe, but certainly not most cultured, as everyone knows. So very often, if you mistake civilization for culture, very often we may misinterpret development in science and technology as progression in culture. It is totally different. When we read, for example, the Vedas, last time, in the last session, I gave a talk on the Vedic hymns. You look at the Vedic Samhitas. I'm not talking about the Upanishads, it's a grand universal spiritual philosophy. I'm talking about the Samhitas, which Rigveda Samhita is the oldest, the most ancient human document which presents before you the picture of a great culture. It is much more ancient than the book of dead of the Egyptians. It is thousands of years older than Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. Now, if you read that book, what do we come across? Sages sitting in forest hermitages, and students from all over the country going to them to learn some cultural values, which call Vedic education. No temple, no organized religion, no anthropomorphic God in whom you are forced to believe, no dogma and no priestcraft, no intermediary between man and God. So when they ask questions, the sages will teach them some higher ideas, teach them taking parables and illustrations from nature. So trees, mountains, valleys, oceans, clouds, sun, moon, these are the illustrations. And based on them, they will teach them great spiritual values. no dogmatism, no imposition of rituals or belief in a particular dogma or a particular interpretation of God. A kind of universal spiritual humanism. So, in fact, that Vedic culture goes far beyond today's organized Hindu religion, though today's Hindu religion is its foundation of this ancient Vedic culture, but the Vedic culture goes far beyond in its reach, in its universal dimension, far beyond the present organized Hindu religion. So in that respect, it is perhaps the mother of human spiritual heritage. And who are these sages? Just a few of them were monks who had taken to monastic life, the life of a monk, when they were little children. But the majority of them were retired householders. After studying the Vedas for 12 years, they will go back to their homes, marry, and after playing the multiple roles of husband and wife or son or daughter, they will retire to a forest hermitage, and there they spend the rest of their lifetime in contemplation and also in teaching these Vedas to the students who have gathered around them. Education was free, but the education was built upon the principles of sanctity, sacredness, of ideas, teacher, and heritage and culture. Even the beauty and charm of the art of retirement from regular activity is a grand idea, actually. See, you find old people trying to fight for every month. If you tell a person who is 90-year-old, he would say, no, I'm only 89 years, 11 months. He will fight for every day because he wants to be young. He wants to be seen to be young. He wants to be seen to be relevant, to be active. Why should everyone be active till he falls down? Why can't we retire? So, first education, then householder's life, then retirement, and during retirement, after retirement, spending their lifetime for some higher pursuits, activities which are not directly linked to earning a few extra dollars. So even the concept of retirement from active life, not due to laziness, but when you reach a stage where there is something higher and something beyond than daily obligations, responsibilities, and there is a higher dimension in human life, that's the time when people start thinking of retirement. So these are the fundamental background ideas that I have had in mind when I introduced the subject. Now, related to this, there is one concept. What was the purpose of human life? We all know success, happiness, contentment, satisfaction. In fact, this is what we normally consider to be our ultimate goals in life. So success is fine. So how do we define success? Or how do we define happiness? The problem with a culture dominated by information technology is that it narrows your focus. It presents before you some short-term goals. Because the computer screen it lives for short-term, It quickly changes. So our focus on ideas and concepts also get focused, narrowed. The inability to think of anything on a bigger canvas. In fact, one of the casualties of an education system which emphasizes information technology is it completely discards or neglects the study of classics. Now, if you only study books which can guarantee a job immediately, and a well-paid job, and which can guarantee success as we understand in empirical terms, which is really not success, it's only absence of failure. It is happiness, which is only temporary absence of unhappiness. Because it will become what makes us happy today can make us unhappy tomorrow when what we gain is lost tomorrow. So, one important problem at the education level is the total negligence of the study of classics. Whether in Western tradition, it may be Homer, Virgil, literature, maybe your philosophy, Socrates, sophists, Plato, Aristotle. I'm talking about heritage of humanity in both the Western and Eastern hemispheres. This is happening all over the world. Negligence or neglect of classics, poetry, music, mysticism, and things like that, which are not directly linked to the short-term goals, this temporary impermanent success. And the result is, once you have piled up enough money or have had enough of so-called success, not real success, after some time, what happens is your emotions, attitudes, and feelings remain crude, because our attitudes, our emotions are refined only when we study classics. Classic could mean not only literature, traditional philosophy, mysticism, and so on. An educational system that only focuses on short-term goals, job, and economic security, job security, leaves a huge vacuum. That could be one of the reasons why students studying in schools or universities or campuses are not getting any training, any refinement for their emotions and feelings, and that could lead to different manifestations of craziness which we read about in newspapers on a regular basis these days. Because there are many students who may emotionally require a different kind of education and orientation. If you read Wordsworth or Emerson, that also is a kind of education which may not be recognized as education by people who normally drive their children crazy in their effort to make them somehow admitted to MIT. Is that happened in very many cases? So, too much of emphasis on technical education and very little scope for refining emotions and attitudes can create a kind of human monster or moron, because the emotions and feelings remain completely unrefined. Now, all these ideas may sound or look a bit obscurantist or maybe unpractical for people who view everything from a perspective of pragmatism. Again, pragmatism is another important demon of our times. Technical education, short-term goals, defining success and happiness and contentment in terms of short-term achievements, and which actually make you put more and more emphasis on science and technology. All these are justified on the fundamental principle of practicality of pragmatism. The father of pragmatism is utilitarianism. J.S. Mill, Bentham, and others. I'm not going to those things. You are not explored it. As a philosophical school, it lost its relevance long back. But still, in modern times, all their ghosts appear in the form of pragmatism, practicality. Again, if you interpret everything on the basis of practical benefits, again you are linking whatever we do to a few extra dollars that we may gain, we may get by giving emphasis to this ultra-practical education. As I mentioned, human mind, human emotions remain undernourished and unrefined. So, the kind of refinement that you can get by reading classics is lost. And as a result, a new set of psychological problems have emerged with the popularization of IT culture. And those problems can be categorized under different headings: anxiety, neurosis, depression. Again, a feeling of total vacuum. You have nothing more to live for. Out of the office, how do you spend your time? Nothing to live for. So it was believed that computer will give you a lot of leisure, but computer has actually made us more active. Because you can work with a computer everywhere, while traveling, by waiting for the plane or train or whatever it is. So, is there something beyond duty and obligation? Now, if human culture is dominated by this compulsion of obligation and duty, then some of the higher values will naturally be lost. And a new set of psychological problems, as I mentioned, and as a matter of principle, as a matter of fact, psychological problems cannot have solutions at psychological level. If there are solutions, those solutions are only impermanent, only temporary. Psychological solutions can only postpone or maybe hide the symptoms and manifestations, cannot solve the mind, because the mind also needs food, and mind gets its food from this higher culture. So that's why in ancient Vedic tradition, there were 4 fundamental values were prescribed, which is called Purusharthas. So literally means Purushehi Arthita Purushartha. It means people, certain values, certain goals desired, aimed at, sought after by human beings. One important central foundational principle of Vedic scheme of life based on these 4 values is that there should be, first of all our pursuits, our actions, our obligations, human endeavors in search of empirical happiness should be regulated by a foundational principle which they used to call dharma. Second one, that's another one. After having achieved all that you're looking for, you should be able to look for a higher value. A value even after we have retired. So if a person has worked for 40 years or 30 years in a company, plenty of money, bank, everything, all family obligations well properly satisfied. What next? So what next is a big problem. If we cannot work, if you cannot go to your office, suppose you have to stay somewhere, loneliness becomes a monstrous demon, a big threat. A person who cannot enjoy loneliness is not mentally healthy. That's why the Susruta Sukta defined mental health as a state of natural, spontaneous inner blissfulness. Prasannatmendriya manaha sosthaga abhidhiyate. The third and fourth lines define mental health, and the first and second line define physical health. Samadosha samaknisha samadhatu malakriyaha prasannatmendriya manaha. So a kind of inner contentment, inner happiness, which is defined in Sanskrit in two words. One is kridagrityada, kridarthada. Kridagrityada means a feeling, a kind of contentment, a feeling of inner blessedness. You feel, I have done what I ought to have done. And after that, the next one comes, kridarthada. I have attained what I was trying to attain. This feeling gives us a kind of inner contentment, inner satisfaction, which, as I mentioned earlier, it is not the absence of dissatisfaction. It is like a coin with only one side. All empirical, worldly feelings of satisfaction and contentment are only the absence of their opposite. Happiness, in worldly terms, empirical terms, is only a temporary absence of unhappiness. What makes us happy today can be the cause of unhappiness when that is lost tomorrow. So every kind of good or so-called happy feelings in worldly terms, in empirical life, is only a temporary absence of its opposite. These two words I mentioned earlier, kridakrityada and kridarthada, in Sanskrit, a very profound meaning. So great poets like Kalidasa, Bhavabhudi, they have explained this, how the ancient kings, when they were busy doing the duties and responsibilities of ruling a kingdom, used to feel this. They called them Rajarshis, means kings, so far as the external activities are concerned. Sages, so the serenity of the mind was concerned. So the serenity of a mind of a sage and the efficiency, the dynamism of a king, or emperor, a ruler, CEO, let us say, in modern terms, modern language. So the feeling, I have done what I should have done, and I have achieved what I was trying to achieve. After this, the second value comes. You have to remember, we were dealing with the four values. First value, dharma. Dharma here means a set of ethical, moral principles which will preserve culture and tradition, which will not destroy, which will give stability and balance and poise to our life and also to life as a whole. So that is said, dhrudhatu, that is the root Sanskrit root dharide iti dharma, means something that preserves, supports, sustains, does not destroy, keep things in balance. That's called dharma. So whatever we do in order to achieve success in empirical life, making use of science and technology, all these should be done keeping this in mind. That is it helpful to sustain ourselves, sustain life, sustain culture? Science and technology can be a big problem, as you know very well. Ecological problems, pollution, air pollution, water pollution, every kind of pollution that I need not give before you. I need not give a list because that's what people talk about these days. Even it's become an important subject for discussion in the World Parliament of World Religions in Toronto this year. So that's people are dealing with. But what about this fundamental principle of dharma? That's the foundational principle. Why we should not pollute nature, why we should not destroy air. There is an ancient Vedic statement, Om madhuvata ritayate madhuksharandi sinthavaka madhvi nasantoshadhihi madhunakta mutoshasi madhumatparthivagam rajaka madhudyaurastina pitaha madhumano vanaspadir madhumagam astu suryaka madhve gavo bhavantunaha. It comes to Rigveda Samhita, where it says, our actions, our use, practical use of earth, skies, mountains, valleys, air, everything should be done keeping in mind that they remain sweet and pure for the preservation of human life. That's the literal meaning of this. So they say, let the winds blow undisturbed. Let the rivers flow undisturbed. Let the herbs remain pure. Let there be no dust, no pollution in the skies, on earth, in trees, mountains, valleys. That's how the verse continues. It's an example. How to do this? So Vedic sages said, when we apply this principle of dharma, the principle of preservation, the principle of sustenance, when we make use of science and technology, then we will be able to evolve to the next important value, that is moksha. So moksha is a transcendental value. Literally, I don't want to talk to you about realization of God as a goal in this age of science and technology. But there is another approach to this subject. That's after success, after achieving material prosperity, after having given good education to the next generation, after building a good home, what next? So that is a big problem. What next? See, if you're unemployed, the solution is right in front of you, getting a job, fine. So it is very simple, very visible. If you have no money, you need a job. If you have no home, you have to build a home. So the problem and the solution, both are right visible in front of us. It's not a remote, something remote. But after having done all this, what next? That's a bigger problem. That's why you find in countries like Japan and Sweden, Holland, many of these countries, where the state provides Medicare, education, everything free. That's why, Norwegians are not very eager to come to America. The reason is they have much better system there. So, like that, these Scandinavian countries, Japan, Sweden, all these countries have got very, very well established, advanced system of education, Medicare, cradle to grave. But these countries are also have got the highest suicide rates. Japan leads the world in having the highest suicide rate per 1,000 population. That's also Sweden and many of these advanced countries. So that's what actually brings us the subject, what next? So there we talk about this transcendental value, moksha. So there are two approaches. If you are an intense spiritual seeker, you can spend your time in meditation. You can you can think of reading scriptures. You will find a means to spend your mental energy, your time, all physical energy, all for something that is protective. You maybe read scriptures, meditation, contemplation, and so on. But many are not willing to do that. But many are willing to do that. But they approach the problem from a different angle. They start a foundation, they start a trust. So that's why big industrialists, captains of industry, who have succeeded enormously in their professional life, you find there's a natural tendency among them to do something good for humanity. Maybe they are not inspired by Vedanta or anything. It's a natural human urge. But this happens only to people who have piled up their money, keeping the principles of dharma in mind. Those who have followed the principles of dharma in their pursuit of empirical worldly success and happiness, that principle of dharma will take them to the next stage of human evolution. That is called moksha. That ideal of moksha, or transcendental value, can manifest in two different ways. For those who are intense spiritual seekers, well, you may try to go to a holy place and spend your time in meditation, holy individual spiritual pursuit. Those who are not so individualistic in their approach, well, they want to do something good for humanity, starting a foundation to fight the victims of Ebola or AIDS in sub-Saharan countries, or helping the victims of earthquakes or natural calamities. You find such people because they have followed the principles of dharma when they were trying to attain success in worldly life. And this principle of transcendental value is most important element is a sense of sanctity. So that's a very important principle, sacredness of sanctity. And that was a core principle of these four values, where the institution of family, the relationship between different members in a family, were based on the principles of sacredness of sanctity. So the relationship between mother and child has got not only biological or family-oriented aspect about it, it had a spiritual aspect about it. So that will help us to preserve a tradition, what we call a sense of sanctity or sacredness of our heritage. I mentioned earlier how the ancient sages used to combine these two aspects, worldly success and spiritual value, transcendental value. Working for worldly success, holding fast to the principles of dharma on the one hand, and evolving to the next stage of transcendental value or moksha. In ancient times, you find this particular way of life was called, or those who led this life called Rajarshi. Literally, you will find the translation is like king. It was not necessarily king actually. Two words are combined here, Rajarshi. Well, to get an idea in modern times, if you can combine the dynamism, the efficiency, the energy, the work result orientation of a great CEO of a multinational company and the wisdom of a sage, if you combine, if you can blend them together, that was the concept of Rajarshi. Now, you have to remember, this concept evolved long before Iberian, Assyrian, Egyptian, Chinese, or Greek civilizations evolved. That's an important point to remember. Even in books, even Rigveda Samhita, which almost 6000 BC, a graphic picture of this life, this plan of life, is given in many suktas. So, I shall refer to those suktas later, another time. So, Rajarshi was the name. Now, who was a Rajarshi, as I mentioned? If you can think of blending together in one person the contemplative nature of a sage. Sage here means a man or woman of wisdom. That's what it is. Not knowledge or information, but wisdom, Information can be a source of problems, actually. Information sometimes makes our mind fragmented. Knowledge can organize information into one cohesive single entity. But wisdom is far higher than that. Wisdom is the ability to handle knowledge. Wisdom is the ability to make proper use of science and technology, information and knowledge, and to avoid making improper use of it. Wisdom implies the ability, the skill, to make proper use of what we know, the tools of science and technology, and to avoid, that's also more important, to avoid making improper use of this power that science and technology give us. Now, a Rajarshi is a person who combines this wisdom. The meaning, in fact, the Sanskrit definition of this word is a very, very, very profound. So that's what I'm going to take up next. Shankaracharya gives a very brief definition, Rajanasya Rishayascha Rajasheka. They are both kings and also sages. Other commentators like Shankarananda Saraswati, it's very interesting description is given. It's very profound. These are all Sanskrit ideas. I'm here to talk to you ideas from ancient scriptures, not from modern books on sociology or anthropology, which you can read anywhere else. So this particular definition is this. Rajitvam Aishwarya Sambatti Rishitvam Tasyaha Sukshmartha Darsana Kshamatvam. This is the definition or the commentary on Shankara's definition of this. Rajitva means the status of a king, efficiency, skill, success, dynamism, proficiency, all these skills that you learn in an elite top class management school. That helps you to build up a big company and make a lot of profit and run it very well. Of course, keeping the principles of dharma in mind. That is Rajatva. Okay. Now, is that enough? If that were enough, then Japan and Holland and Sweden, these countries would not be leading the world in suicides. These are countries where they have made use of all these skills, science, technology, management, everything. State takes care of everything. But that's not enough. Now, the second quality is the quality of a sage. Tasyaha sukshmartha dasanakshamata means the ability to understand a limitation of success. The ability to understand the limitation of the success and prosperity that science and technology help us to build up, to produce. Success is needed, efficiency is needed, but they alone are not enough. Along with success, we should know that success is not enough, or where success fails, where we really do not succeed, though you are succeeding, still you do not succeed somewhere else. Where is that point where success is worse than failure? The ability to understand the limitation of success, that is the role of a sage. Well, along with worldly success, we go artha and kama in the traditional terminology, we also should know that human beings or human civilization, human culture have got some higher goals other than worldly success. Not instead of worldly success, but along with worldly success. Human civilization, human culture needs some higher goals, some spiritual goals. Well, in purely empirical terms, we can say, is it liberation or moksha, which I am not going to take up in this context. What it means is the ability to share what we have achieved, what we have acquired with our fellow human beings. So once we accumulate something and also learn the wisdom to share it with others, then we'll understand the limitation of success. In one of our Upanishads, this interesting paradigm of life is explained in the form of a dialogue. A little boy asks for 3 boons when he meets a great teacher. Yama, the boy in Nachiketa, the Katha Upanishad comes. I'm not going to details the background of the story. he was allowed to ask for 3 boons by a great teacher. He was a little boy. First he asked, he had left his home and he had gone in search of this teacher without the parents' permission. He was a boy of 5 years old. So he said, my first need is that my father should not scold me when I get back my home. So the teacher immediately granted that boon. He was capable of, he had the divine power to grant any boon he was asked. The second boon the little boy asked was, I should be able to live a happy life in this world and next world. I should have a plenty of money, good home, let us say in modern time, good job, social security, Medicare, everything. The angel granted that, Yama. And then this little boy asked for a third boon. So the third boon that he asked was this. No, I want to ask you something higher. You have granted a happy life for me in this world. Joy, money, wealth, good home, everything. But after a long time, I may die. So these things won't continue with me. So what will happen to me? So in fact, the ability to ask a question, what happens after success? What happens after all these things are gone? That's a stage of higher culture and civilization. You find all the highest moral, ethical principles evolved when human beings had the refinement to ask the question, what happens after death? Even the richest man or woman in the world will be humbled, will have a feeling of humility when he or she is told, these things that you acquired in this life won't stay with you after some time. And death is certainly a stage after which these things won't remain. So what will happen to me? Ayam predi vijigitsa manushi asti tege nayam asti idi chaigi edad vidya manusishtastoyaham varanamesha varastrudya. This is the mantra in the Kathopanishad. Some people say after death, everything is gone. Life is a journey that begins with the cradle and ends with the grave. When the body is pushed to the tube, that's the end of the journey. Death is the end of human existence. That's one view. Another view, death is not the end of it. Death is only a transition point. So human journey doesn't come to an end. Death is only a full stop. No, sorry, death is not a full stop. Death is only a coma. That's another view. So you please teach me the truth behind this. Then Yama, his teacher, teaches Nachiketa, there is a higher way of looking at life. Life becomes more complete, more perfect. You achieve real success in life when you are able to understand the limitation of success as we understand in worldly terms. Because the moment we realize that success as we understand in worldly empirical terms is really not different from failure, because that success is short-lived. It is temporary. It is not permanent. You cannot guarantee a billionaire may be born as a pauper next life. What's the use of all this? But people don't extend their imagination beyond that. If you accept that life is just a journey that comes to an end with death, then that leaves a huge vacuum. You need a threatening God, a policeman to keep you down. Actually, a God who sits above the clouds with a big stick in his hand, with a list of do's and don'ts, threatening you with hellfire, or promising you heaven, that God is not different from a most uncompromising policeman. But Vedanta says, it's okay. There is a higher way of looking at life. Whatever you have done in this life, good deeds, bad deeds, you carry them in a bundle and you are born again with that. So better in this life, you acquire, along with success in material life, you acquire another wealth. Good actions, good deeds, good thoughts, noble activities, unselfishness, practice of unselfishness, love or compassion, broad-mindedness for fellow human beings or other living beings. This is also one kind of success. This is also one kind of wealth that we can produce. Then we look beyond the empirical, beyond the worldly success. So that's a higher transcendental value. Now, in all people who lead a disciplined life, who achieve great things, keeping some principles of dharma in mind, they have a natural urge to loosen their wallet, to do something good for others. It's a natural human urge. And there are others, of course, who practice this from their early days. So these four values constituted the essence of Vedic way of life. So, first of all, it helps us to understand the limitation of the so-called success in worldly terms. Success in empirical life, as we understand, can be more successful, can be a greater success when you add another value to it, dharma, and this transcendental value called moksha. Then success becomes more successful. One problem of a culture that is dominated by IT, information technology, where human beings become enslaved by the concept of short-term goals. Crude, empirical, pragmatic, or practical goals. Many of these higher values can be the casualties. So maybe one good suggestion we can think of is to integrate, along with information technology, along with the tools of science and technology, we should also integrate certain values and ideas that we have inherited from the ancient masters. In all traditions, in all cultures, you find there have been wonderful teachers, philosophers, literary masters, classics. So they also contain a unique wealth. And that wealth is necessary and important for the survival of human civilization. Thank you. It's a very abstract subject, so I have tried to put some ideas from ancient Vedic heritage. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.